And meanwhile, Nigeria played host to trade ministers of member countries at the first D-8 Trade Ministers Council meeting on the implementation of the D-8 Preferential Trade Agreement. CNBC Africa's Umu Ibrahim was there and caught up with Olusegun Aganga, Nigeria's Minister of Trade and Investment, and discussed some of the strategic ways these countries are looking to boost trade links within the region. Let's take a look.
3 areas where we've had discussions already. One of them is the Preferential Trade Agreement. The other is about visa for businessmen. And the fourth is about the area of customs. Now, this meeting is going to focus on the PTA. And it's important, but if you look at the 8 countries, they account for a sizable proportion of the world's GDP. It's a 1 billion market. And if you can come together and implement the PTA, it will be a win-win situation for every country. So the target is that in 5 years, by 2018, the intra-D8 trade will hit about 500 billion. And to let you give a rough idea, we were about 15 billion about 10, 12 years ago. By 2012, we're about 150 billion, but we want to hit 500 billion intra-D8 trade by 2018. So we have to be very strategic about it and make sure that the PTA is enforced.
Do you want to take us through, what the trade and investment agreements between the D8 countries is all about?
The D8 countries have come together as developing economies to help and support each other, to make sure that through trade, they can deliver sustainable and inclusive economic growth. So the idea is to look at certain items which are imported by different countries or produced based on competitive advantage as different countries. We recognize that the world has changed today, that you have the supply chain, you have the global chain. And the idea is to make sure that each one of us is on that chain. And by doing that, we can increase the intra-D8 trade. That's what we're trying to do, so that it becomes a win-win situation for each member state and helps drive growth and inclusive and sustainable economic growth.
How would you describe Nigeria's trade with Africa, particularly West Africa, and what initiatives are there to boost, trade activities in Nigeria and the rest of Africa?
Nigeria sits in a very unique and very important position. So we see it, you have the ECOWAS, 300 million people. You have the Africa, 1 billion people. You have the D8, 1 billion people. So our trade strategy and policy, and we have different agreements in place, should leverage on these PTAs, should leverage on these agreements and make sure that we maximize trade based on areas. So we have 4 main objectives. One is to increase or improve the quality of trade. That is, move the quality of trade from raw materials to semi-processed or finished goods. Then you get more. You create more jobs locally rather than exporting raw materials. That's the first objective. The second objective is leverage on the PTA agreements like we have with the D8 countries now to see where they are on the global supply chain and make sure through those agreements, make sure that we export those things. But we cannot do it on our own. We have to work with a strong private sector. The third is to look at the trade facilitation tools. What are the things inhibiting trade? So if you look at West Africa, for example, official records will tell you that the trade, intra-West African trade, is only 10-12%. But I know it's not correct because we don't have credible numbers. A new World Bank report based on trade between Nigeria and Cameroon, for example, showed that only 8% of the trade between Nigeria and Cameroon is captured. So there's a big informal. So we need to make sure that we bring that onto the record to start with. Then you're making informed decisions. But there are particular obstacles there that we're removing. One is the logistic transport. That's why we're embarking on a sea link project. So you have vessels to move goods across the West African states. We need to reduce the issue of incidences of multiple taxation. So all those things we are working with ECOWAS to remove, and I'll be meeting with the West African trade ministers on that. We're doing the same thing at the African level, and that is exactly what we're doing with the D8 countries.